Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I'd like to discuss the reports that some prominent Conservative MPs are worried about the closure of railway ticket offices. Not because it means a much poorer service for the public, just for the sake of even higher profits for the private rail companies. No, they're fine with that. It's because they think it could cost them votes in the election. So it should be easy for the government to do something about this though, right? Well, might be tricky. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel. So yes, according to the Telegraph, over 24 Tory MPs have urged Sunak to do something about ticket office closures. One quote was very on the money. It said, "It's really crap politics to be doing this now, just before a general election." Now, note the concern is only about the votes, not that the policy is a bad one for public services. It's like they'd be fine with it after a general election, not just before one. That's all they're bothered about, that it's unpopular and they're heading for an election. But the statement is nonetheless correct. You know, I've been saying for a while, Sunak is simply getting the fundamentals wrong. Any party leadership can get things wrong, and of course they all do. But if you're not considering policies in terms of how it will impact on the next election, you risk getting everything wrong. Now, the good news for the Tories is that mechanically this should be very easy for the government to deal with. There's no need for ticket offices to close. Rail companies aren't struggling to turn a profit and in need of efficiency savings. You know, the government could cynically tell them to just drop the plans and then, you know, we're going to do things popular. We'll win the next election. After the election, if you want to bring these plans back up, we won't object at that point. We're just not going to go along with them a year before an election. Only this could be tricky for Sunak because so devoid is he of political acumen that he readily jumps on any bandwagon which Labour object to. It's almost like it, you know how some people on social media will go, and you'll see this on both sides, and will go, oh, we've upset such and such, we must be doing something right, as if that's the metric. Sunak's the same. Oh, Labour upset by this. Oh, it must be the correct policy then. And you know, if there's something that both Labour and the unions object to, oh, you can bet your arse Sunak thinks that's exactly the sort of policy to support. So closing down ticket offices on our railways. Now, for some travellers, it's the only way they can really realistically get onto a train. For others, it's just an incredibly good way of getting the best and cheapest ticket options for them. The closures mean that railway stations will often not have anyone staffing them. That's a huge concern. And that would upset a lot of people. There's a lot of vulnerable people, whether they're disabled or elderly. And, you know, elderly voters, I mean, they're the people who vote in large numbers and without whom the Tories would be lucky to win 3 seats, much less the in excess of 300 they need to win an election. But for the rail companies, it's an expense, isn't it? As with all privatised public services, they're interested only in profit, not the service, which is why it is absolutely essential that if you are going to be silly enough to allow privatisation of a public service, the government must make sure that it is tightly regulated in order to force them to focus on the service. Because that's what we want. We get they want the profit, we want the service. But for Sunak to oppose the move, he would be backing a policy that both Labour's Shadow Transport Secretary Louise Haigh and RMT's Mick Lynch have been urging for a while now. I strongly suspect that Sunak's skin is a little bit too thin to put himself in a position where he does what Mick Lynch told him to do last year. But this has the potential to be like, Boris Johnson's policy to starve kids during the summer of 2020. He got his MPs to back an unpopular policy and then U-turned, making them all look like proper nanas. And all because Boris Johnson had no interest in how the public would react to his policies. He just assumed he could charm them into supporting anything. Or at the very least, they'd still vote for him in the election. Eventually, Tory MPs got sick of backing toxic policies, especially when Johnson would then fold when the pressure hit him. Sunak's in danger of the same thing here. The correct course of action would have been to block this move from the start, to have identified that it would be unpopular. You know, for as long as Sunak has been Prime Minister, his party have been behind in the polls. It's absolutely staggering that he thought he could afford to adopt any unpopular policies. There's always a bit of an argument because there are always policies that you believe are good, but the public don't. There's, you know, every one of us will champion a policy that we think is actually a good policy, but it's unpopular. And there's always that argument about, You know, if you're really far ahead in the polls, well, we can afford to lose a few votes. Let's back this policy anyway. But when you're behind in the polls, you can't. And especially for a policy from which he derives no political benefit. You know, there may be some Tories who are making a few quid off shares in the rail companies, but there's no political benefit to the Conservatives in backing this move to close the ticket offices. But if enough Tory MPs decide that this is an issue that is going to cost them precious votes, and the votes are now precious, there are a lot of Tory MPs in seats where they can't be glib about even losing 100 votes. So Sunak could get himself trapped here. The last thing he wants to do is to be forced into a humiliating U-turn. Like, he could change policy now, no problems at all. No one would make a fuss about it. He hasn't backed the ticket office closures loudly enough to be associated with the plans. He could just say he's reflected on the concerns of voters and responded. He'd actually get credit for that then. But if he tries to hold on and the pressure against it grows, and he does very publicly defend the closure of the ticket offices, he risks rebellion and a much more public climb down. Now, it's one thing to change policy to take account of the views of the public. That's democratic. But if you're forced into a climb down by your own MPs, that looks weak. So Sunak's got a bit of a decision to make. Does he change his policy and suffer the indignity of being congratulated by Labour and the railway unions for doing what they urged him to do from the start? Or does he hold firm and potentially lose more seats for backing a deeply unpopular policy, including amongst his own target voters? And the answer's not as obvious as it might appear. Sunak has a habit of making the wrong choice. Perhaps he would understand the situation a little better if he ever took the train. Seems to be the one form of transport with which he's completely unfamiliar. And in terms of another little thing just to point out, given that we know that Conservative MPs, or at least some Conservative MPs, are concerned about this, it sounds to me like it would not harm if you are also concerned. For you, if you have a Conservative MP, to write to that MP and express those concerns. It sounds like they would like a little ammunition for this. But there we are. Those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, please click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, the join button for memberships. And until next time, I'll see you later.